Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Stacey Satang with the Housing Alliance of Pennsylvania. Thank you for joining us. Our webinar today is titled Utility Moratorium Ending Soon, What You Need to Know. To let you know, this presentation is being recorded and will run approximately 60 minutes, including question and answer time. Please note that anything submitted in the chat will be saved. We will send you a link to this email. A link to this webinar via email within the next few days, as well as uploading it to our YouTube channel, and we'll post it on our website. Attendees, you'll be muted during today's presentation. If you have questions for the presenters, please type them into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. If you have a logistical question for myself or other Housing Alliance staff, please use the chat feature. The chat feature should not be used for questions for the presenters. Again, please keep those in the Q&A. I'll now turn it over to Gail Schwartz to begin today's presentation.
Oh, thank you, Stacey. I was muted. I'm going to ask Liz to go ahead and pull up the presentation. So as Stacey said, I am Gail Schwartz with the Housing Alliance of Pennsylvania. I am excited to have our amazing partners from Community Legal Services and from the Pennsylvania Utility Law Project. So today's webinar, as Stacey said, we really are discussing the changes to the utility moratorium and what are the protections that are coming into play for low-income tenants. Before we do get started, I do want to say that, you know, with all things when it comes to this pandemic, they are constantly changing and evolving. The information that is presented in today's webinar is the best information that we have today. We are closely monitoring the situation and we'll be sharing any updates and changes as they come available. Another thing to know is that even though we have some really brilliant legal minds joining us for today's webinar, none of the information that is presented today should be taken as legal advice. And for all of you who may be experiencing some challenges with the utility company directly yourselves, or are working with clients or residents who are dealing with substantial utility arrears and maybe have challenges communicating with the utility, again, we will be providing resources of how to get that direct legal advice and guidance. So with that, let's get to the information that has brought all of you here to this webinar today. So to give some background, you know, we have the Housing Alliance here. You know, our function, for those of us who don't know, is that we really do advocate for the resources at the state level and provide training and technical assistance to communities that address the affordable housing crisis. We work representing a network of organizations that really span the continuum of housing, which, you know, all the way goes to those with lived experience who, you know, the tenants that live in that housing and the low-income homeowners, all the way through nonprofit service agencies, local government, quasi-government entities, as well as housing developers, owners, and managers. We also have with us the Pennsylvania Utility Law Project. For those who are not familiar with PULP, they represent the interests of low-income residential utility consumers statewide through policy and litigation. They are also a great source of training and technical assistance to support the legal aid and nonprofit communities throughout Pennsylvania. And then we have Community Legal Services, specifically representation from their energy unit. Again, you know, they provide direct representation to low-income families and organizations in the Philadelphia area that ensure access to utility service at affordable rates and improve affordability policy at state, local, and national levels. And so with that, I want to introduce, we have from Pulp, Liz Marks, as well as Giovanna Brackbill, and then from CLS, we have Jolene Price. And so I'm going to hand it over to Liz first, who is going to set the stage when it comes to what's been happening with this moratorium.
Thanks, Gail, and welcome everyone. I'm so glad you could join us today. We are gonna, we're gonna talk about the basics of what's going on with the utility moratorium. We're gonna talk about preparation for possible shutoffs and how to protect vulnerable consumers from termination. We'll go through some general client advice and strategies for helping assist consumers. We'll provide a brief overview of some of the universal service programs, additional resources, and then we'll get to all of your questions. So do use that question and answer chat. We'll try and respond to some of them as we go in the chat, but we'll try to get to all your questions. So first, I just want to set the stage with a bit of a timeline. So March 13th, 2020, the Public Utility Commission issued an emergency order. Many of you are aware of this. It prohibited regulated electric, natural gas, water and wastewater, and telecommunications, and also steam. You can't forget some people do have steam service still in Pennsylvania. So all of those regulated utilities were prohibited from terminating service during the pendency of the COVID-19 emergency order. Of course, Governor Wolf extended that order twice through November 30th. That may be extended again. We're really not sure what will happen next. As all of you, we are rolling with the punches here just the same. So as the summer progressed, the arrearage levels have been growing substantially, and the PUC has grown concerned about the level of arrears and has been looking through the summer at lifting the moratorium a number of times. So August 10th, 2020, the PUC issued a letter from Chairman Brown Dutrell requesting that comments be submitted by interested parties. And I know that many of you signed on to various comments or submitted comments on your own to the commission, explaining what would happen if terminations would begin again and the need to keep strong protections in place. Fast forward to a couple of months, October 13th, 2020, the PUC issued its most recent order lifting the absolute ban on utility terminations and allowing utility terminations to begin for residential and commercial customers on November 9th, 2020. We'll talk an awful lot about that. In that order, it included protections, new protections for a new protected customer class that will remain protected until March 31st, 2021. I will note that the commission set this hard date for the date that terminations of all residential customers may begin again. But there is an additional stakeholder comment period with comments due in February. So I would encourage you, if you are part of an organization that works on these issues, to submit comments or to reach out to us to coordinate if you are interested or need more information about how to get involved in that process, to inform the commission about what's happening on the ground when we get to February, which may look very different from now. So with that stage set, I'm going to pass it over to Jolene to walk us through what some of the protected customer information is.
Thanks, Liz. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name, again, is Jolene Price. I'm a supervising attorney in the Energy Unit at Community Legal Services of Philadelphia. So I'm just going to walk you through a little bit of an overview of what the commission did and what sort of everyone should be prepared for as organizations, as people, as customers. So the order that the commission entered entering into what they're calling a phase 2 of the moratorium ended the absolute moratorium on termination, absolute prohibition on termination, and said that protected customers, which we'll get into the definition of that a little bit later, would be protected, continue to be protected from shutoff. They also required utilities to do an additional outreach or notice to customers at risk of termination prior to a standard termination notice. And then their order also included some language around payment arrangements for small businesses who might be at risk of termination. It addressed connection and reconnection fees and late payment charges for individuals who are considered protected customers. And it also allowed for additional medical certificates, even if a household has used the 3 medical certificates that they generally have a right to use in the past. The commission order is now says that any household can use an additional 2 medical certificates, and they also encouraged the utilities to accept flexible use flexible methods to accept income verification and other verification that the utilities might require for determining whether someone's a protected customer or for other reasons. Next slide. So the first thing that we should that everyone should be aware of is that the October 13th order that the commission entered did require utilities to provide a special outreach or notice to any customer who's at risk of termination. As is noted on the slide, the communication is required to inform the customer that they are at risk of termination, give a general time frame when that service would be shut off, inform the customer of options to prevent shutoff, and it has to be sent at least 10 days before sending a standard 10-day termination notice. So folks you work with may get 2 different communications from their utilities, one being a communication that's this pre-termination notice or pre-termination outreach, and then the second being a standard 10-day termination notice. Now, the all-important question: who are these protected customers that can't be shut off until March 31st, 2021, that are protected from termination under this order, continue to be protected from termination under this order? They have to meet a few different requirements. The first, it only applies to residential customers. Second, their income, their gross household income has to be at or below 300% of the federal poverty income guidelines. The next slide has a table, so we can just take a quick look at what that means and what that income level is for folks who don't know that already. And then in addition to those 2 things, the customer has to request a payment arrangement from the utility and apply for all available assistance programs if eligible. And they're only considered a protected customer, as far as we can tell under the order, if they do those things. And we'll talk more in depth about what advice we're saying we should be giving customers. And in addition to termination protection, utilities have to waive all late charges, reconnection, and deposit fees for protected customers. So here's just a chart to give you a sense of the yearly household income for a couple different federal poverty levels that are applicable in this space. So we just talked about 300% of federal poverty level. That's what the commission said is that's the threshold for being able to be a protected customer. And and for all of these, I just want to make sure folks know that it is gross household income and all household members. And then we'll talk soon about where 150 and 250 or 200 apply as well. And so just in addition to the order, I just wanted to do a quick sort of overview of what are called Universal Service and Energy Conservation Programs in Pennsylvania, your USECP. Regulated gas and electric utilities are required to have a suite of low-income programs that are designed to assist low-income households in maintaining, affording service, and not being terminated. They are a customer assistance program that includes reduced bills and arrearage forgiveness, a low-income usage reduction program, which is weatherization and energy efficiency for customers' houses, places of living, something called the Customer Assistance Referral and Evaluation Services, or CARES, which is a case management folks at the utility who can provide referral to other social services supports. And then each utility has a hardship fund, which are one-time grants available to help pay back balances. And I'll, from here, turn it over to Gio to talk a little more about what advice we should be giving customers.
Thank you so much, Jolene. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Gio Brackbill, legal fellow from the Pennsylvania Utility Law Project. And here it's going to be like the top 6 pieces of advice to give a client that says, hey, I'm at risk of shutoff. First and foremost, pick up the phone, call your utility and inform them that you are a protected customer. That is, if you meet the definition that Jolene had talked about with being 300% of the federal poverty level, and provide that income information if it is required. Next, always apply for the low income assistance programs and hardship fund grants, which we'll talk about in detail later. And apply for these even if you haven't received a shutoff notice or letter from your utility yet. The next thing to protect yourself from shutoff is requesting a payment arrangement. And remember, do not agree to a payment arrangement that you can't afford. That's not going to help. And do not agree if there's a dispute as to the amount owed. And I'll go into further detail about payment arrangements and a few slides down. Next, pay what you can when you can pay it, because this establishes a good faith payment history. And it can help you down the line to qualify for programs and grants. Even if it's $5, what you're doing here is showing that when they look back, yes, they did make a payment this month and this month. And next, if you're a protected customer who's having issues with proving to the utility that you should be protected, whether that be proving your income information or whatever, you have the right to file a complaint with the Public Utility Commission. And when you do that, try to do it at least 24 hours before your scheduled shutoff. Lastly, apply for the Low Income Heating Assistance Program, LIHEAP, now. Those who previously received funds in other years may be used to receiving an application in the mail for LIHEAP. This year, don't delay, just apply now. And also, please join our webinar next month if you have more questions about heating assistance. That's going to be on Monday, November 2nd from 2 to 3 p.m. hosted by Pennsylvania Legal Aid Network, PULP, and CLS for an informational session about LIHEAP. Next slide, please. Okay, so here's how to prevent utility terminations for tenants. If you're a tenant whose utility is in your landlord's name and the landlord doesn't pay for whatever reason, renters have certain rights. The utility must notify them of the arrearages that have built up and give the renter an opportunity to pay the last 30-day bill or the equivalent of the last 30-day bill. Renters are allowed to go forward and pay the utility bill and then deduct the amount that they paid out of their own pocket for the utility bill from the total rent price. And they have protections from retaliation. If the landlord tries to retaliate, it's very illegal. So they will have certain protections. A landlord or owner of a property may not generally request to cut service to a tenant's property for failure to pay rent. And the citations, like where the protections that you'll find these protections in the law are for regulated utilities, the discontinuance of service to leased premises, and for unregulated utilities, it's the Utility Service Tenants' Rights Act, or USTRA. Here's more information about preventing utility terminations for payment arrangements, which we were talking about a little bit before. Payment arrangements are essentially a way to spread your debt that may have accrued over time. So it's an agreement to accept liability and pay the debt in one or more payments. You don't want to accept liability for a debt that you don't agree you owe. So if you look at the bill and you're like, that is not right, that's not, the amount that I owe, don't agree to a payment arrangement on that amount, because then you're accepting liability for it and you introduce more problems. Secondly, do not agree to a payment agreement that you can't afford to pay. When you're negotiating, if the amount that they're asking is too high, it's okay to walk away. But you do want to call and request a payment arrangement, because that's going to help you qualify as or meet the requirements of a protected customer. So it's just important to take the step to request a payment arrangement and see if you can work something out. But if it's not going to work, don't agree to it. There's different types of payment arrangements. There's ones that are issued by the utility. And remember, your utility has discretion. They can offer as many payment arrangements as they want, and they can offer them for any length of time. And payment arrangements requirements for protected customers. So to be a protected customer, a customer must request a payment arrangement from the utility, but the utility isn't required to give one. I know that sounds confusing, but you got to take the step and call the utility to request one. And then even if you're denied the payment arrangement from the utility, you still qualify as a protected customer. On the next slide, we're going to talk about what happens if you are denied that payment arrangement from your utility. So if you're denied, you can be granted one from the PUC. Generally, payment arrangements from the PUC are for those under 150% of the federal poverty level, and they're for 60 months or 5 years. The PUC can generally only order a utility to issue one payment arrangement. So because there's these stringent standards, they can only issue one usually. They can issue a second, but there has to be a change in income or other serious circumstances for a household to get a second one. So be very smart about this PUC issued payment arrangement and strategic if you're going to use your one-time payment arrangement. Don't have your client use a PUC payment arrangement now if they're going to be at risk of termination in March. CAP customers can't get a payment arrangement for debt accrued while in CAP, and a PUC payment arrangement can be extended if the household has a significant change in circumstances, whatever that may be. Another type of payment arrangement is a restoration payment arrangement. There's a reconnection fee that is cost-based, and for those under 150% of the federal poverty level, it's a 24-month payment arrangement, and for those 151% to 300% of the federal poverty level, it's a 12-month payment arrangement. Full payment may be required if a customer has defaulted on 2 or more payment arrangements in the past. Remember that protected customers are not required to seek a PUC issued payment arrangement, which is different than a utility issued payment arrangement, which they should request. Next slide, please. Oh, I'm passing it over back to Liz Marks. Thank you.
Liz, you're muted.
Of course I was muted. Sorry about that, everyone. I was just saying I do see a lot of questions coming in. That's great. Keep them coming into the chat box. We're answering them as we go, and we will also have plenty of time at the end. So we want to cover some of the details about the assistance programs, right? Because in order to become a protected customer, you have to seek to apply for available assistance programs. And I did see a question asking, do you have to apply for all available programs? The order does say all available programs. We are interpreting that to mean utility assistance programs, not that they have to go and apply for SNAP or TANF or other programs. So of course, if it's a program that would be beneficial, we want to get as many people into as many programs as possible. But to become a protected customer, at least our understanding of the order and our current interpretation would be that they need to apply for all available utility assistance programs to help with that utility. We are trying to seek some clarification from the Commission on this point. And of course, as Gail said in the beginning, we'll be providing some updated information as it comes available. But to get right into it, CAP is going to be, or the Customer Assistance Programs, these are the primary assistance programs available to assist regulated gas and electric customers. And then there's also some limited CAP type programs available for water assistance, though they don't always have the arrearage forgiveness component, and they're not quite as complete as the electric and gas caps. So the caps are known by different names across the state. So if you are up in Erie, you're going to know this program as LIHEAP. If you are in the central or northeast and you have a PPL customer, you're going to know it as On Track. If you're in the Philadelphia area, you know it as CRP. The rest of the state generally sticks with CAP or PCAP, but they're known by so many different names, and that's important to keep in mind. The general benefits available to CAP customers would be, one, reduced rates. So they generally try to target a level of affordability that is going to help consumers afford over the long term. Now, we've been working very hard for many years at PULP and in conjunction with CLS and on behalf of our clients at CAUSE-PA and TURN and some of the other organizations to try and make sure that CAP actually is affordable. Right now, we do recognize that even while in CAP, if you are low income, the rates are not necessarily affordable, but they are much better than the full tariff rates. So get them into CAP so that they get that reduced rate, lowers your monthly payment month in and month out. Also, when you enter CAP for the first time, you will get any debt that you enter the program with is frozen. So it won't collect additional late fees while you're in the program. And over time, if you make your reduced payments, you will earn arrearage forgiveness on that debt that's frozen. As far as eligibility requirements, generally, and this is going to be different in, there's just one utility that provides a bit of a higher level income to get into CAP, and that's People's Gas, goes up to 200% of the poverty guidelines. But for all other CAP programs, the eligibility guidelines is going to be 150% of the poverty guidelines. You will need to verify income. And I do note for those who are working with immigrants who may not have a social security number, programs may ask for it, but you don't need to have a social security number in order to get into these programs. I do note that during the pandemic, many of the utilities have temporarily waived income verification requirements, and some of them are accepting income verification over the phone. This has been a tremendous help for those who can't get access to documentation of their income. And so, if you're working with somebody, and there's a lot of questions in the chat box about income verification, ask. ask your utility to exercise flexibility and allow them to verify over the phone, or to, with the assistance of a third party, perhaps, you know, they call the employer and verify that income over the phone. But you know, we know people are challenged in getting access to documentation, so that waiver is in place for many of the utilities, and we would always encourage you to ask for that additional flexibility. Another one of the big assistance programs are the hardship funds. These are grant assistance programs and are generally offered by all of the major regulated electric, gas, and water utilities. Some of the unregulated water authorities also have small grant assistance programs. And so first place to go is your utility to see if they have one of these hardship fund programs. Generally, the benefits are going to vary widely, but many of the largest electric and gas and water utilities have a threshold grant amount of $500. That is an up to. So somebody only needs $300 to resolve a crisis or resolve a past due debt. They may only get the amount that will resolve that crisis. But again, it varies generally by program to program. So I do encourage you all to have your clients contact the utility. The eligibility is also going to vary by utility. Generally, that's at 200% of the federal poverty guidelines. There's also a number of utilities that impose a good faith payment requirement, meaning that you have paid a certain amount over the last few months. And again, the third requirement is generally, and these are all general eligibility and vary by utility, but generally, together with any other resources, a grant amount must be able to resolve the crisis or the hardship that you're experiencing. So sometimes, you know, you can't get a $500 grant if you owe $5,000 and have nothing else to put towards the bill. So sometimes it's about figuring out what that patchwork of assistance is to get to that threshold to stop that crisis. I do note, during the pandemic, again, there are a number of flexibilities that the utilities have agreed. Many have waived the good faith payment requirement, recognizing that people have been out of work for so long that they have not been able to make recent payments at all. Also, some have waived their income or raise their income threshold or grant amounts, you know, to a higher level. So certainly, given all the variations, reach out to your utility, get that best up-to-date information about the eligibility requirements. Don't just assume that because on the website it says eligibility is X, that it might not have been changed because of the pandemic. I note that LIHEAP opens next Monday. We're almost to opening day of LIHEAP. Many of you are probably familiar with LIHEAP, and I'm not going to go into too much detail on this because we're about to do a whole other webinar next Monday, so do register for that. We've included the link for that November 2nd webinar. We will be sending some resources out about LIHEAP, so look for that for some more detailed information. But generally, LIHEAP offers 3 types of assistance. One, it offers cash grant assistance between $200 and $1,000. And the grant amount varies widely depending on the type of heating service you have, the geographic location you're in, and your household composition. The other type of assistance is crisis grant assistance, and these grants are going to range from $25 to, this year it's up to $800. In past years it's been $500 or $600. That grant amount will be increased for this year, and the crisis grant is available for those who have a home heating emergency. So that's either that you're at risk of termination or that you have 15 days or less of deliverable fuel. And then there's also this other third critical part that people always forget about, and that's the emergency furnace or line repair and replacement program. So if you're working with somebody whose heating system is not functional or is not optimally functional, right? So if it's only, heating partially or it's very inefficient, you can get that furnace repair or replacement assistance, which is really critical, especially as we enter the heating season. Eligibility is going to be 150% of the poverty guidelines. You need to have a home heating responsibility. You need to be a Pennsylvania resident. And then for the crisis assistance, you also need to be have a home heating emergency. There is an open question right now whether or not DHS may make an exception to the crisis rule to allow a past due bill to form evidence of a crisis. That is not the rule yet, but it may become the rule. So again, we will send out as much and as best information as we can as we know it. But do sign up for our November 2nd webinar for a lot more details. There's a lot of information about how people can get into the program and apply and get that really critical assistance. Just want to quickly mention the availability of Lifeline assistance for those who are struggling to have stable telecommunications, broadband service to their home. This is so critical right now while we are in the pandemic. Unfortunately, the benefit is not great, but it does provide some measure of assistance to those who can't afford really basic telecommunication services or broadband. It provides a $9.25 per month subsidy to assist, and again, telephone, broadband, or a bundled service if you have both telecom and a broadband service. Eligibility is generally going to be 135% of the poverty guidelines. There's also categorical eligibility, and that's for any SNAP, Medicaid, SSI, public housing, or veterans pension and survivor benefits. So if you have any of those, you're going to automatically qualify for Lifeline benefits. It is one benefit per household. So if you have multiple people living in the home, mother, daughter, both of them would not qualify for the assistance. It is one per household, and that would be an economic unit. So if there's rumors or something like that, there can be multiple benefits in an actual house. It's just the household only gets one. And due to the pandemic, yet again, there's a temporary pause on any program removals and some flexibility in what you need to provide to qualify for the program. And so I am going to turn it over to Jolene to walk through some of the resources that are out there to assist with sifting through all of this information.
Thank you, Liz. All right, so right, we just gave you a whole bunch of information, and what if you need help navigating it? Well, here are some of the that you will be able to that you should think about reaching out to. First is to go to the utility company directly. They'll be able to tell you how you can apply for, how a customer would be able to apply for CAP or for their hardship funds, or whether there's any, whether there's money available in the hardship funds. They would be able to refer you to whoever processes, if there's a community organization that processes applications for some of these programs, they would, the utility company would refer you over to that organization and give you information about how to apply. And then if you're not satisfied with how the utility information that utility has given you, or you think they have done something incorrectly, and I'll go over this in the next couple of slides as well, you can file disputes. So the Public Utility Commission has what's called the Bureau of Consumer Services that takes informal complaints. And as part of the order that was entered by the PUC, they specifically noted that if a customer is not satisfied with whether the utility's determination about whether they're a protected customer, they should file an informal complaint with the Bureau of Consumer Services. You can also file formal complaints with the Public Utility Commission. We listed here both sort of information for our organizations, for PULP and CLS. For PULP, you'll see two different numbers. One is sort of for technical assistance for advocates and attorneys, and then a hotline for utility consumers to call. And then again, for CLS, I'll just say that's my phone number, so don't, hand it out to everyone. But you can feel free to call me for technical assistance questions. If you have clients in Philadelphia area, or in Philadelphia specifically, that are looking for help or are confused by the process, they can call our intake line, which is the 3700 number. Another resource, particularly for customers who might be a little over income for our services, would be the Office of Consumer Advocate, which is charged with representing the interests of all residential customers in the state, and they have a hotline as well, 1-800-684-6560. Okay, so we just laid out all these steps that we think people should take to ensure that they're a protected customer. So what if something goes wrong? What if they try to apply, but something happens and they aren't able to, they think they're eligible for a program, they get denied a program, or they have some sort of issue applying, and then the utility says, well, you're not a protected customer. Our advice is that anyone who thinks they're a protected customer and is, has trouble with the utility for whatever reason, should initiate a dispute within the utility. Utility has the obligation to address disputes, and the customer has to give the utility a chance to resolve the dispute before going to the PUC. And so we just put in this slide a couple tips for dealing with utilities. The first thing to remember is that utilities do have broad discretion to resolve customer disputes and to sort of come to a favorable outcome with the customer. You really want to make sure when you call, if you want to initiate a dispute with the utility, to say, I am disputing XYZ, I'm not satisfied with the resolution of my issue, and you want to request that they issue you your utility report that they're required to do under the regulations. You do have an obligation to pay undisputed bills if there's anything, so it doesn't protect you from, it doesn't mean you can't pay your bills, but it means that they will look into what you're concerned about and try to come to a resolution with you. Next slide. But if you're not satisfied with what the utility has done, or you are, coming up on a potential shutoff, and you're concerned that you haven't heard back from the utility, or that you haven't gotten a good resolution from the utility, you can call the Bureau of Consumer Services at the Public Utility Commission. If you file an informal complaint with the PUC prior to the day of termination, so at least the one day before termination is supposed to happen, that active filing will temporarily stop the termination while BCS investigates your complaint. PUC also has a formal complaint process, which involves an administrative hearing before an administrative law judge, and appeals go to Commonwealth Court. Just to note, for the formal complaint process, you have to be a licensed attorney to represent clients, which is sometimes different than some other administrative agencies in Pennsylvania. But advocates and paralegals can refer clients to file pro se, to file on their own and provide information about rights. etc. So here's just a little bit of tips on the BCS complaints. So again, there's that number. I think this might be the third slide that number's on, and I think that's good. Just that is the number to call. And just a note that in my experience in practically, sometimes when you call the number, someone will pick up, and more often when you call the number, they will take, an automated system will take the number and call you back. So just so that you and whoever you're working with are prepared for that possibility that it could take some time for them to call you back. Generally, there's a 3-year statute of limitations on issues. So if it's something that happened and is in the past and happened more than 3 years ago, you can't necessarily file an informal complaint about it. And again, if you file an informal complaint to stop termination, it must be filed the day before termination. Now, it's also important once you file a complaint to stay engaged in the process. Make sure to communicate with your investigator. You can call back and ask for updates on your case. And you should definitely, even if they don't ask, customers should provide all relevant information and copies of any documents that the customer thinks is relevant to their dispute, to make sure that BCS has all of the information in front of them. So once you get a decision on your informal complaint, you have to follow, it'll include some appeal instructions, and you can appeal the informal complaint decision to a formal complaint. And it'll have certain, dates that you need to file certain things by. You'll have 20 days to file your notice of appeal that just says, I'm intending to appeal this. And then as long as you file that, you're able to, that continues the stay on termination that was in place due to the informal complaint. And then once you file that notice of appeal, the PUC will send you formal complaint forms, which you can access online. It's on the link is on the slide. Liz, I see your but then once you get that, there'll be 30 days to file your formal complaint. And again, you have to meet those deadlines to keep that informal stay on your termination that started with your informal complaint. There's a PUC form for appeals. We recommend that you use it, although it is not required, and use the discovery process to build your case, negotiate with the utility. Important reminders about disputes. Negotiating with the utility is required before filing a complaint. Utilities have a lot of discretion. You want to ask the utility to review the account. You want to be direct with your request. You want to ask the utility when you say, can you review my account to stay termination, to review the case. And for advocates, it's often helpful to develop relationships with utility employees and build on those relationships. As was mentioned before, things are changing. Lots of things change every day in this crazy world we are living in. These are some links to our social media where we provide updates on a lot of different things, including at CLS, what's going on with energy and specifically utilities, and often specific to Philadelphia, but often also applicable statewide.
Great, thank you so much, Jolene and Liz and Gio. That was a really, really great and thorough presentation. And I see so many of our attendees are all the way through to the end. So in the last couple of minutes, I just want to ask a couple of clarifying questions. Now, to access all of these different types of assistance programs, the first place that people should go is to the utility company directly, and that people will need to contact each of their utility companies, that there isn't like one application that would cover like gas, electric, and water, correct?
Correct. They should reach out to each utility, ask them what available assistance, let them know that they are a protected customer at the income of 300% of the poverty level or below, so that they can be protected through March. Now 5 months or 6 months until March comes very quickly, right? So it is also important to start working towards that. Just because you're protected from termination, you know, April will be here in no time. So it is important to reach out to the available assistance and apply for everything they're available for.
Great. And sometimes we have these situations where it's sort of a little murky who's responsible for the bill, you know, whether it's, you know, the bill is under somebody in the household and that person is no longer in the household because, you know, either they moved out and didn't transfer the bill name, or perhaps somebody passed away. How do you recommend folks negotiating that situation? Should they contact the utility company? Should they be contacting you all?
I'm sorry, I was looking at another question as you were asking.
For folks
I'll admit
where the bill is in somebody's name that doesn't reside in the home, either that person moved
Right.
out or has, you know, perhaps passed away.
That is really, oh, go ahead, Jolene, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say it sort of is going to depend on the specific circumstances. Often, like whether it's a landlord or someone who just moved out but is still alive versus a dead relative, you know, the dead relative, those are going to be different, potentially different scenarios. I think the first step, I would think, just, you know, in a general sense, is to see if there's a way to get the bill in the person's name who's living in the household. And then if that's not possible, then you're probably going to have to reach out to local legal services or someone to help sort of sort out the what's going on and whether there is a way to get the bill in someone's name. But that's not always possible. It just really depends on the circumstances at the property.
Right.
Right.
First contact the utility, then call us if you're still having problems.
Okay, and then what about for all of those folks who may have had a debt that predates the pandemic, and how does that come into play with this change in the moratorium and programs?
If you're a protected customer and you meet those requirements, 300% of the poverty level, apply for available assistance and ask for a payment arrangement, you should be protected until March 31st. Again, got to address that debt, right? It's only going to go up. And as we enter winter heating, the costs are only going to get greater. So really important to address that debt, to get, you know, something worked out with the utility. And as Gio said, establish a good faith payment history now over these next 5 months by paying what you can. If that's $5 a month, you're showing that you have made that effort, and utilities are always willing to work with you more. So even if you haven't paid in a year because you've been unable to even deal with it, right? Low-income customers are dealing with so much every day, and making that payment, it's not that they don't want to pay, it's that they can't even comprehend what they need to do in order to avoid this. So they hide from it. Making a $10, $5, $20 payment a month is going to establish a better payment history and show that you've been trying, even though you haven't been able to pay it all. So people with pre-existing debt, when we entered COVID, there's a lot of them because we had the winter moratorium that overlapped with the COVID moratorium. And as long as you are doing something to work towards that, your utility is going to try and work with you to come up with some reasonable payment arrangement.
Great. I think the next question that we have is really like, how do we get this information out to folks in a clear and concise way? Like the utilities, do you have the minimum that they are supposed to do? A lot of it seems to be dependent on the mail, which has had some challenges this year. So what are additional resources out there and strategies out there to help get this information and keep this flow of information to those consumers who are in need of protection?
So I would say keep an eye on our social media. We'll have some information that comes out that way. I know we at CLS has been working on some different materials, including a flyer that hopefully will go out to everyone with the webinar. Information that is sort of succinct advice steps, and we would welcome anyone distributing it any way they want to their networks, in person or via the interwebs. So that's what we can do, is to try and get as much information, get sort of everything boiled down into bite-sized, understandable pieces. But I think part of the issue and the concern from this order that the PUC entered is that it is very confusing, and so we're also, that is something that worries us too. I don't have a good answer necessarily beyond like, we have information, we're going to try and get it out as much as possible.
And we also at Paul put together a kind of a statewide, much like CLS's. So CLS's will focus on the programs available in Philadelphia, and ours will be a little more general. And I think both of those, I hope, are going to go out along with the PowerPoint after the webinar. So there'll be some client-facing information, but I would say have them call the utility, have them call one of their local legal services programs, and let's get them in for to meet those requirements. And really the threshold is not high, and utilities should be exercising, they've been urged in the commission's order to be flexible with verification requirements. So if you're working with a client and they don't have income information, or right to the mail-based point, if they don't have information that they've applied for the programs, for instance, we're not sure what it means, like how somebody would prove they applied a lot of people have been asking, and we're trying to get to as many questions, but if you're over 300% of the poverty guideline or 200%, there's not many programs that are available to you. So you may be screened out before you even get to the application process. That shouldn't stop you from becoming a protected customer. You just have to apply for the programs that are available, and utilities should be accepting your word that you've applied for those or that you are just ineligible.
And there's a lot of utilities that fall under the PUC, but there are many utilities that do not. And so is there any sort of guidance for addressing, shutoff and terminations in dealing with those who are not falling under the PUC guidance? Or are there additional protections?
And Jolene can talk to Philadelphia Water Department, which is one of the, if not the biggest unregulated utility in the state. But, there are some programs available. Of course, LIHEAP, if you are one of the, with one of the unregulated electric companies, there are rural electric cooperatives, or if you have deliverable fuel, LIHEAP is going to be the program for you to address deliverable fuel and electric. Some of the local water authorities have some small assistance programs, and the Pennsylvania Municipal Authorities Association, we've been working very closely with over the last 7 months. They have put out guidance to all of their members that now's the time to start being flexible in payment arrangements. But until you call that utility and ask them for flexibility, they're not going to get it. So if they have a termination notice, it's important to reach out, request that payment arrangement. And of course, course, I did see some people are not quite sure those tenant protections, those apply to unregulated and regulated utilities. So even if it's an unregulated utility, if it is in the landlord's name and the landlord stops paying, there are protections from termination in those instances.
Great, great. And how do people, you know, there's Pulp who does statewide work, there's CLS in Philadelphia. How do people get connected to sort of the energy legal services experts in their community, or how do they find if there are local utility legal experts in their community?
In their community, you know, the places to turn would be your local legal services program, which would be palegalaid.net/find-help or find-legal-help. So there's the PA Legal Aid Network that has legal aid programs serving every county in the state. And so contact your local legal aid program. And then there's also a number of community-based organizations. Many of you are on the line, I know, that work with the CAP agencies or other local agencies that are processing many of these programs. So if you're not one of those agencies, getting in touch with one of those agencies, they're going to know a lot more. But you can always contact Pulp. We are a small staff, so if all you know, 600 of you contact us at once, we're going to be slow to get back to you. But you know, your local legal aid program is really a good place to turn.
Great, great. And so I think, again, to just sort of recap everything that we've been, you know, discussing today, like above all else, the first step for everybody is to call the utility company directly, whether it's a PUC utility or not. You do have to communicate with each individual utility company. Nobody should ever feel pressured into accepting a repayment plan that they don't think that they're going to be able to keep up with, or accept charges that they don't believe are fair. If they do have something to pay, even if it's as small as a few dollars a month, to go ahead and make that good faith payment. And then if anybody feels that, you know, they're not getting a fair shake from the utility company they're dealing with, they can of course contact legal services, contact Pulp, as well as the complaint through the PUC.
Yeah, and that PUC complaint, and I do see a number of people asking about a clarification again of the protected customers. And again, if you are 300% of the poverty guidelines, you have applied for available assistance programs that you're eligible for, and you've requested that the utility give you a payment arrangement, you fall within the protected customers. And if the utility is not considering you a protected customer and says, we're still going to proceed with termination because we don't believe you, that's when you call the PUC and you say, I am a protected customer. I'm having a hard time getting my utility to recognize that.
Okay, and then now, are people going to be required to provide proof that they applied to all of these programs? And how would someone go about that?
We hope not, because that's going to be very daunting, especially with the mail delivery problems. A lot of applications right now are either phone-based or mail-based, particularly for those who don't have internet. So there are some that are online applications, but the vast majority across the state are going to be mail and phone. We hope that the utilities are going to be reasonable and work with folks, and we have every confidence that they will be. We are also going to, you know, seek some clarification and are working to get some clarification from the commission on this question of how do you prove you applied for all available assistance programs. But generally do your best, right? If you know that the client you're working with might be eligible, you know, have them submit that application and get that assistance, because ultimately we want everybody to get into these programs. But, you know, if there's reasons they can't apply or barriers and the utility's not working with them, then call the PUC.
Okay, and one last question. If you're a landlord and you are renting to somebody that you know is at, 300% of the FPL or below, but the utilities are under the landlord's name, but you are serving somebody who is, income qualified, can that landlord get some of that benefit?
I think that's going to be, well, I'm not entirely sure. I haven't thought about that scenario of, if the landlord actually has the bill in their name and the tenant is responsible for paying for it. I think if the landlord has the bill in their name and they don't have the income level that would make the protected customer, if the bill is behind, they may be at risk. Now, depending on the utility and depending on what the lease says about who pays, or in cases of unregulated utilities, doesn't matter what the lease says, those landlord protections or tenant protections would still apply. So I would say those are going to be, hopefully those aren't common. We don't see that scenario very often. But if you do have that kind of tricky scenario, give Pulp a call or give CLS a call, and we can try and help you work through that. Julie, did you?
Great. All right. Well, with
No,
that,
sorry.
no, please go.
I was going to say that CLS's energy unit does not represent landlords, so we wouldn't be able to provide advice to a landlord, but we could provide advice to the tenant.
Okay. All right. I think we have a couple of other just quick clarifying questions about this Lifeline program. Is it for, let's see, a few about that. And I just lost it in my C.
I've seen a couple of those come through, and I'm unfortunately not able to talk and type a different question and answer at the same time. So I'll just generally answer. Lifeline is available for, yes, voice service right now, voice service, cell phone service, either one, not both. They can choose. So if it's somebody that needs a landline right now, they can still get Lifeline service for landline. That is possible to change. There's been a huge shift to cell phones. A lot of people are cutting the wire. Unfortunately, rural communities are still really reliant on wire service, and so we're fighting hard on the policy end to try and protect Lifeline for hardwired service. But they can choose that or broadband. You can apply it to any of them. And to apply for Lifeline, you generally are going to go to your provider and ask them, do you offer Lifeline assistance? Do you participate in the Lifeline program? And they'll help you to get to the national verifier system and apply. And in the question and answer box, I did provide a link to the Lifeline application and where you can get more information. Generally, that's at www.usac.org. And there's a bunch of information there about Lifeline.
Great. Well, I want to thank our entire panel today who presented really detailed, as much detailed as possible. As we said at the beginning of this presentation, so much is changing and changing rapidly, and we are going to continue to work with our partners at Pulp and at CLS to ensure that all of the critical information that you need to support your residents, your clients, your neighbors, friends, family will be provided to you as close to real time as possible. And so with that, I want to thank you all for joining today's webinar. Thank our panel, and we will see you at the next one.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.